All right, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that do know me and for those of you that don't, I'm Rhea Bailey. I am the Manager of Indigenous Services, and I am joining you or zooming to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam and the Tsawwassen First Nations. And I'll hand it over to Sarah to introduce herself briefly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Chow. I am one of two community partners with Legal Aid BC. I'm joining you today from where I live, which is on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. So thank you all for joining us today for a Gladue report experience. I guess I do want to extend this acknowledgement as it applies across the province to where everyone is joining from. And if you would like, we would very much welcome any additional acknowledgements, which you can type into the chat. And as you do that, maybe I can share a little bit about where this session came about. This session actually came about from our community partners who Alex Peel and I helped support. It was a request that came from community partners who wanted to better understand what it was like to get a Gladue report. Like so many of our frontline workers, the community partners want to understand so that they can better help their clients. And so when we received this request, we went to Indigenous Services, to Jolene and Rhea, to see whether or not this was possible.
And just to build on that, we had, when we received this request, we knew that the next step was to connect with one of our Gladue report writers. And so we were able to connect with Caroline, and we're really lucky to have been able to do that, who is one of our when we were looking after the Gladue report program, one of the writers that had been with us for a really long time. So we connected with her to see if she could think of someone that she might have worked with that would be willing to share their story. And at the time, we weren't totally sure whether that was going to be a go-ahead, because as any of you know who may have worked with clients that have gotten Gladue reports, this is a big ask. It's a very personal experience. And, you know, in going through that process, there's a lot of sensitive information that can come up. So having the opportunity to listen to someone share their journey and their story of getting a Gladue report is very special. And I think we're all really, really lucky to be together to have this opportunity. As most of you may know, Gladue reports were available through Legal Aid for about 10 years, since 2011 up to March 31st of just this past year. So, and you may know now that they are now available through the BC First Nations Justice Council. So if you're looking to get some more information on how someone may get a Gladue report, you should check out the BC First Nations Justice Council website, which you can locate at www.bcfnjc.com. I'd encourage all of you to check that out. There's a lot of other resources on that website that would be probably helpful for you. So in terms of just Legal Aid BC's role, we continue to be involved in the production of public legal education and information around Gladue, and supporting our tariff lawyers by provision of Gladue fees for submissions and other things in terms of advocacy for application of Gladue principles. So the purpose of our session today is to share what it looks like to get a Gladue report from the perspective of the person getting it, and also from the perspective of the Gladue writer. And to introduce our presenters today, I'd like to hand it over to Jolene.
Thank you, Rhea. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jolene Steininger, and previously I was a Gladue report coordinator, and currently I'm working as a project coordinator here. And I want to thank you all for being here, and most importantly, thank Lisa and Caroline for being with us here today. So Lisa had a Gladue report prepared for her by Caroline. So they're going to share with us so that we can understand what it's like for someone to get a Gladue report and for someone to prepare the report. So ladies, thank you so much for your generosity in sharing with us. It's much appreciated. Caroline has been writing Gladue reports for 10 years, and she's a very kind soul who goes above and beyond just to help people. She is an Algonquin elder, and I'm proud to know her. She is also an elder at Correctional Services of Canada and is currently at RRAC. I'm going to introduce Lisa as she described herself, And soon you'll understand why this is so important. Lisa is a proud, strong Mohawk woman, and I'm deeply impressed to know her, to see her willingness to share her experience, and to see her strength. Caroline is going to moderate this experience for us today. So maybe Caroline, you can start us off in a good way.
All right, thank you, Jolene, for that. And Rhea, thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for being here. So my name is Caroline Buckshot, and I am, my Indigenous name is Kanigonavit, which means woman who teaches. And I am from the Kitigan Tibi Anishinaabe First Nations in Northern Quebec, in the Algonquin territory. And I'm grateful to be on the Coast Salish territory to do my work. I am on the Matsqui and Sumas territory. So I thank the ancestors of this land for allowing me to be here. Been here over, well, I think around 30 years. So I think they should adopt me. So first of all, I want you all to get grounded. Put your feet on the floor, open up your hands, close your eyes, take a deep breath. And we're going to ask the Creator to provide a safe space for us to do this work today. And we thank Lisa for her generosity and her kindness to share her experience that she's gone through with the Gladue writing process. And thanks for the facilitators to make this happen. And thank the Creator for all the goodness that He's provided for us on this journey of life. And thank Him for having our wonderful families and and close friends in our lives. We ask that the Creator guide our footsteps and we may walk in His light in a good way, and open our hearts to be kind to ourselves and to others, and to open our minds, to hear the words and to process them in a good way, and open our ears so we may hear the teachings and to ground us to Mother Earth as we do this work. And we ask the Creator to take care of us, keep us safe in this time, the very difficult time. All my relations. Oh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Yeah, please go ahead and start our conversation with Lisa.
Okay. Well, hello, Lisa. How are you today?
I am well. How are you?
I'm well. So I'm going to ask Lisa about, what did you know about Gladue report before you met me? What did you know?
I had never heard of it. Had no idea what it was. My lawyer told me about it, and that she wanted me to obtain one before going to court.
And so, can you explain what the process was, Lisa, after you met me? And and I'll explain the process I follow as a Gladue writer.
So we were introduced to each other via telephone to start. You came across as very warm and easy to speak with. You explained to me that the Gladue report actually tells my story to the court and helps the judge make decisions about me that consider my circumstances and that I'm Indigenous. We also, you explained that we would work together in regards to designing a healing plan for myself. We initially talked for about 2 hours and then followed up by emails or quick calls.
Awesome. So the process that I follow as a writer, and as Jolene's explained, I've been writing reports for about 10 years. So I'm assigned the report initially. And then I would be okay, I'm not going to follow the notes. I'm just going to talk. So after I've been assigned a report, first of all, with legal services was when I began, and then now the Justice Council. So the report is signed to me, and now the Justice Council actually gets the consent form signed by the client, which is really, really good because the client has to agree that whoever I talk to, collaterals, people that they work with, family members or whatever, I have permission to speak with them, because the Gladue report is not just about the person's story. It's about the people around them. And how can they add to the report? How can they enhance some of the information, especially around residential school or FASD or a trauma. Most of the clients have a lot of trauma in their lives, and so the consent form is important. First meetings are usually basically a meet and greet and explain what the Gladue report is. The purpose of it is to capture the social history of the client, and then to provide information how this is all connected to the impacts of intergenerational trauma, basically, and also to try to connect the dots between what happened in the past, what happened to this person, and then how did they end up in front of the judge, with their charges. And usually it's a very unique flow for each person. But the really important part of the whole Gladue report is writing the healing plan. So the healing plan is most important, because once you told the story and once you made the connections to the court, then the writer has to provide a healing plan for the judge. It's not a get out of jail free. It's not to make it easy, but it's to give the judge alternatives to jail. And as we know, jails and provincial and federal are both overrepresentation of Indigenous people, and we all know that. So that is really the sort of bottom line of the report. That healing plan, I can't stress it more than I can, because without a healing plan, if there's just some ideas that the client could attend or could go to for healing, that's one thing. But to actually get the client to buy into those recommendations is really, really important. So if someone has drugs and alcohol problem and they need treatment, it's not okay just to say they'll go to treatment. It's much stronger report if you get your client to agree to go to treatment at some point, or to attend the programs that are offered in the community. It's to get them to buy into it. So that is one of the big chores of the writer. A lot of people think, well, that writing Gladue reports is easy peasy, but it's not as easy as you may think. And I'm sure Lisa will share during the next few questions. There's a lot of sensitive questions you have to ask your client, and you have to make sure that you create a safe space for them to share these things. So I think I got that covered, right? So the next question is, people want to know what the experience was like for you, Lisa. Maybe you can share about the types of information and questions that we talked about.
We spoke about my upbringing, my adoptive family, what it was like. You asked me about my experiences in school, connections to my culture. I had no connection to my culture. I was taken away from my mother due to being born addicted to heroin and alcohol. And at that time, I was placed in a adoptive family that was very abusive in more ways than I can count or care to remember. Going through our conversations and how much you taught me about it, including I had no idea about the 60 Scoop, which I was ended up being a part of, and the intergenerational trauma, how it impacted my life without me even knowing it. It was sort of the opening to my journey. It was the door that after 50 years of, or 52 years then of pushing it down and pushing it down and pushing it down. If I didn't deal with it, it didn't exist. For a lot of reasons, it was too painful to. But it really, I will never be so grateful as to the journey that it started for me.
Wow, that's really awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And so the next question is, how was it for you talking about these hard things, Lisa?
I was very apprehensive. It was something that I never spoke of, was always told not to speak of. And so to actually have, I guess, the opportunity as well as the feeling that I was in a safe place speaking to you about it, it was just the weight of the world had been lifted. Was starting with just the first few, conversations and such. I mean, it started me on my path to healing, to forgiveness, just not with myself, but with the people that hurt me as a child. I always thought that, well, Lisa, other people have had it worse than you. And I really owned my own pain. And that was the first time in my life that I actually had done that. We had to take a lot of breaks, as you know. But, like I said, it was nice to start that. It was nice to actually be given the opportunity to actually speak about it.
Wow. Well, I really admire your courage, Lisa, for the hard work that you did and for the going through the process. So was there anything that helped you get through those difficult times in our conversations?
Again, feeling safe with you. You were so kind to teach me about the sacred medicines. Again, the breaks. There was a lot of meditation that I did. And in between our conversations, or to do with everything else that I was trying to process with what I had done, I found that the grounding that the sacred medicines give you, the acceptance of who I was, that I was Indigenous, because I, as sad as it is, I would be washed as a child with bleach because my skin was brown. So I was robbed of everything in regards to my heritage, the language, the teachings, I was, basically an Indigenous child being raised in a white man's world. And going through this process, it brought to light a lot of the feelings that I had as a child, and always being different and not knowing why. So, yeah.
Wow. So for many involved in Gladue, we'd like to think that Gladue being an opportunity for healing or a way to help people on their healing journey. Has that been the case for you?
Definitely. again, it was the doorway that I needed to walk through. That was the Gladue, reporting and concept and all of it. When I think back and actually take not ownership, because I didn't do it to myself, but actually deal with what I went through as a child. It was that, and maybe some people don't understand, but to have an opportunity to actually just allow it to come out and not just keep pushing it down and being ashamed of it. I don't know. Eventually I got to a place of forgiveness and, for my natural mother, what she must have gone through for her to mask her life and her pain through drugs and alcohol. It allowed me to forgive her for the way I came into this world, and to have empathy for her. So yeah, kindness is free, like we've spoke about, and it can change someone's life. And sometimes that's all they need. And it's actually, as an abused child, it's very hard to accept kindness because you're not used to it. So you don't know how to process it and you don't know how to accept it, So yes, it was a very positive, very positive. I don't know. I can't think of the word that I want.
Experience?
Thank you. Experience. And I'm very thankful for it. And I always will be.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing that. That was so important. And I'm really proud of the commitment that you've made to yourself and to your healing. And Lisa and I have kept in touch over the years. So it's been wonderful to see her growing into, getting past some of the pain and healing from, some of the past. So that's really great. And like the elders say, we never get completely healed. We're on a healing journey. So very, very proud of you, Lisa. And I'd like to share an experience of a young man who had a Gladue report, and he was from the Seabird Island community, and he was very young. And so we were holding a circle sentencing for him in Chilliwack. I wrote a Gladue report, and I was so happy to be part of a circle sentencing. I had a talking stick made for the judge, but I didn't want to give it to him before the court proceeding started. I wanted to give it to him after so that wouldn't influence his decision. That was how I was thinking anyways. So as it turned out, the judge, everybody was there, the judge, the Crown, the defense counsel, but we invited 3 elders to participate in the sentencing. And so the judge couldn't find his eagle feather, which he normally used in a circle sentencing. So I presented him with the talking stick. I thought that was really awesome. He started to pass the talking stick around the whole room. Everybody had a chance to talk. But the mother of this young man was not present when I wrote the report. She wasn't available, but she was in the courtroom that day. She came out of treatment to be part of that, to support her son. So when the talking stick came to her, she started to tell her story about the experience she had in residential school and the abuse that she suffered and all that she's talking about and all the trauma she suffered. This young boy never heard any of that, and he was just crying. The tears were just coming down constantly. And it was the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed, like in real life, right? I knew the impact of the reports on the person I'm working with, but I often never saw the reaction of the families, right? And this was like truly an amazing experience. And as it turned out, then for the young man, he learned so much that day about his mother, and I really do think that he learned a lot about why he behaves the way he does and why he became who he was. And I'm sure that he started a different journey afterwards. I was unable to keep in touch with him, which I think is Jolene used to talk about this. There should be follow-up on these reports. We should know what's going on with these, with the people that we work with. I think I agree with you 100%. So as it turned out, it came time for the judge to make a decision. So he gave the young fellow a community sentence, which meant that he would have to report to a probation officer. And I had said to the judge, excuse me, all due respect, but we have 3 elders here. And what do they have to say? And long story short, the judge really thought about that. And he was Indigenous himself. And he wasn't sure how he was going to change that in policy. But what he did is this young man had to report to the elders. I thought that was truly amazing. I mean, that may have been the start of something really important for the Indigenous people for the future. So I thought that would be an interesting story for you to hear. So Lisa, you've acknowledged that going through the process of having a Gladue report done was hard, but it provided you with opportunities. What were these opportunities?
It gave me, I think, the biggest opportunity was it gave me my heritage back. And I was acknowledged for who I was. I learned who I was. I didn't know until I was really about 15 that I was actually Indigenous. And that was just through a vile comment about being an unwed squaw like my mother was. I'm so proud of being an Indigenous woman. I understand so much more now about certain things when I was growing up, certain ways that I was, and it all links in now, being kind to Mother Earth and, the water and all of it just makes sense. And that is not something that you can be taught. It's inside. I had the opportunity to meet you, Caroline, who you are just an amazing, magical soul. And you have taught me so much. I learned about the 60 scoop, excuse me, and the class action suit that was going on with that. In November 2019, I obtained my status. And that was the day that I was given my heritage back. And it was a very emotional day, but I knew where I came from. Different things, like instead of pushing down my emotions now for, whether it's anger, fear, sadness, I now deal with it and I talk through them. I use the sacred medicines to help me with that, meditation to help me with that. I've been really blessed, as strange as that might sound, through this whole process. I'd never been in trouble before this. And, at 50 years old, right? But things happen. And I am a firm believer, and always have been, that they happen for a reason. Through this, I volunteered with the Cat-Ski Nation, and for the COVID vaccine centers there for them. And there was a lady there, and she's very frightened actually of having the vaccines done, and shaking. And I don't know why I did it, but it just came naturally. And I just said to her, would you like me to smudge you?
Wow.
And I held her hands and calmed her right down. And it really made me feel worthy. I don't know, without what I have traveled so far on my journey, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have been able to do it. I wouldn't have known how to do it. So, your journey never ends, but mine now is so inspiring and educational. And my granddaughter is 8, and she did a report at school, and I've taught her how proud she can be for being Indigenous, and taught her all about our Mohawk Nation in Ontario, and being from the Bay of Quinte. And she went to school, and I picked her up after school one day, and I said, so how was your day, darling? And she said, well, Grandma, she said 2 things happened today. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, the first one, I had to say, who is my favorite person? And she's like, that's you, Grandma. So of course, there goes the waterworks with Grandma. And I said, and what was the second thing, darling? And she said, I said that I was a proud Indigenous child. And so the waterworks started again. And of course I get, oh, Grandma. But to me, that was probably the most beautiful thing I will ever hear, is that she is not ashamed of it. She is being taught to be proud of it and to embrace it. And she will go on to teach her children that. So, for all of us that were sort of taken away from our culture and never allowed our teachings and such, we can make a difference. It's never too late. And she's a prime example of that. So, it's like I said, for something that started out very, very horrific, through this whole process, has really turned into something very gratifying and educational for many ways, emotionally, spiritually.
Wow.
So.
That's so beautiful, Lisa. And I can tell you from when I met you to now, you're the beautiful soul. I can see that. Beautiful. Some people say that it takes a long time to get a Gladue report. And my feeling is that this is all about a person's life, very important. Not allowing them report devalues their life and opportunity to heal. If someone asked you if they should have a Gladue report, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, yes. It might not work for everybody. Everybody has their own paths that they're on, but everybody deserves a chance to have that guidance and to have somebody have the confidence behind them. We never know how a person gets to where they are, nor should we ever judge how a person gets there. but we can always help them, to be in a better place, to know the avenues that are out there for them, healing sessions, counseling sessions, education for them. There are so many resources out there that you don't have to walk your path alone. And same as myself, I was never, ever aware of that. I just thought it would be something that I took to the grave with me. So.
Wow, that's really amazing. And so just to recap the discussion, I want to thank you, Lisa, for sharing your experience with us. And I'm really, really proud of you and for the work that you've done on this journey. And what you shared wasn't easy, and but it's opened up a lot of opportunities for you. And just to share a little bit of something that happened between Lisa and I, which I think is an amazing moment, is that not long ago I went to Ontario. Lisa said, well, if you're around Tyendinaga, would you pick up some earth for me and bring it back? So I was able to do that. I haven't given it to her yet, but it's here at my house. And I'm hoping that one day when we can meet comfortably, I'm going to bring it and give it to her. I also picked up a nice little stone for her as well, so she can have part of her community with her out here in BC. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you're next.
I don't know, I guess just to reiterate again, I'd like to thank you, Caroline, for all your support and guidance and teachings through this journey with me. We are all individuals and we all walk individual paths. Helping someone through a bump in their path might change their future. And to me, everybody's worth that chance, whether they take it the first time, second, third, fourth. You never give up on somebody. I think one thing I would like to say is that in regards to the Gladue report, to reiterate what you and Jillian were saying as well, I think it would really be beneficial for people who are having them done to have, follow-up support workers or facilitate continuous support around them. If people are dealing with different, distractions in their life, be it, any type of addiction, and there's so many. Sometimes they just need that extra guidance. So to maybe make sure that they are, because yes, it's not a get out of jail card free. It's, what I did is something that I live with for the rest of my life. Nobody else. But for some, it's easy to fall back into that pattern again because the pain sometimes is so vile that it's easier to mask it. So to have that guidance that keeps them on that track, or the follow-up to make sure that they're on that track, I think would be really vital to people who are having these reports done.
I agree 100%. That's really awesome. Thanks for recapping that, Lisa. So I guess we're coming to the end of our presentation. So I want to end it with a really important story of that demonstrates the importance of Gladue reports. So I think we mentioned that I work in federal corrections. I'm at intake, so I see all the Indigenous people that are sentenced to federal corrections. And so we read all the reports. We have social workers, we have program people, we have all kinds of people reading all of the reports of all these men that come into federal corrections. And they spend about 3 months in my area. So this particular social worker is reading a story, reading the files on this young man. He's Indigenous. He's 27 years old. And he committed a fairly serious crime. And he was sentenced to 5 years. But when he arrived at RRAC, you know, his teachings was where he got his teachings was from criminals in his life, from unhealthy people in his life, unhealthy people in his community. So he became that unhealthy person. So the Gladue report was written for him by, I consider, an elder. And so what let me go back here to the social worker first. So she was reading all the reports on this young man, and she was actually afraid of him because he was so violent. And she didn't want to meet with him in a room by herself. So she wanted to meet him out on the unit where the officers could see her. And so she was, you know, really worried about meeting him. But when she came to the Gladue report, she read it and she couldn't believe that this was the same person. She was, and her word, I was blown away, because the writer captured his social history, captured how he got, you know, how he was before the court, and basically, well, why he got sentenced. But what he described was a human being, you know, and why he ended up where he did. And like he got his teachings from a very unhealthy environment. And so when she read that, she learned that one of his career goals was to be a beekeeper. Now, how can a very violent person want to be a beekeeper? It doesn't make any sense, really, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. But what she saw through that Gladue report was a human being. And so she was able to meet with him in her office. And of course, she continued on to work with him. So my experience with him was he actually started to incite the other offenders. And of course, he got charged for it because you don't do that, right, in a federal facility. And so I brought him into my office and I sat him down and I asked him if that's the kind of life he wanted to live, and I had also read the Gladue report. I said, so this report describes you as a very different person than all of your files, right? But the way you're behaving is like all of your files. So you look like a dangerous person. You're behaving like a dangerous person, but that's not really who you are. Able to help him see the difference. And so the question was like, do you want to follow that path, or do you want to make some changes and follow this path? Because it sounds to me like you have he had other dreams as well. I said, so you want to follow this path and live this kind of life. And of course he wanted to live this kind of life. But his question was, you know, how do I get from that to here? And that was a very good question. So I was able to work with him and said to him, you know, we'll do some teachings, whatever. But the final result of that whole report was, number one, the social worker saw him as a human being. I was able to actually know a little bit more about him than I normally would just by reading his files. And so what I did is where I worked with the correctional manager, and we're able to get him to work for me as my helper, and to pay off his charges, which I think was pretty amazing as far as the correctional manager was concerned. He was able to understand what happened to this young man and how he ended up in corrections. And I thought that was pretty amazing. And I think Lisa said that earlier in her talk about, you know, realizing that you're an Indigenous person and that you're really you're worth something. You're a human being. You really deserve a chance, right? And I really commend you, Lisa, for that, because I saw the same kind of scenario for this young man. You could actually see his whole demeanor change once he realized that he had an opportunity. So I guess that's the end of our discussions, and I guess we'll turn it back over to Jolene. So thank you so much for everyone for listening.
Thank you, Caroline and Lisa. That was amazing. So kind of you to share all of that information and to help us to understand a little bit more from each of your perspectives, what it was like for Lisa to get the report and for Caroline, and sharing some of your experiences with other within the correctional system and with other Gladue report clients. It's so important for us to hear that. A number of questions came in ahead of this experience. So we'll take a few minutes to answer some of those questions, and we'll share those questions on the screen here. So just bear with me a moment so you can see the questions, and we're going to take turns answering those questions. So just bear with me a moment. Okay, so we'll go into the first questions here. What aspects of Indigenous experience are most likely to see results in court?
Okay, and Jolene, I think I'm the one that's been designated to answer this first question. And before I do that, I just wanted to take a quick opportunity to say thank you to Lisa and Caroline. I don't know if you guys have had an opportunity to scroll the chat, but the outpouring of respect and appreciation for you being here today and you sharing your experiences and your story is immense. So I would encourage you to check that out. I also note that there's been a couple of questions that have shown up in the chat as well. And so what we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to run through the questions that we received in advance first. We may go over time, so I'm going to invite those of you that can stay to stay, and understand that for some of you, you won't be able to stay, but we'll try to get through those question pieces. So that's how we're going to approach it. So again, what aspects of Indigenous experience are most likely to see results in court? So some of you may know that the purpose of a Gladue report is twofold. The first purpose is to bring an individual's life experience to the court so that the court can understand what may have contributed to that individual being in the criminal justice system. How did they arrive there? This experience, as you've heard from both Caroline and Lisa, includes not only the experience of the individual, but also the experiences of their family and of their community. So looking at what they've gone through as well, trying to take a holistic approach. The second component of it is to take those experiences and that story and help the court take those into account and consideration when looking at what options in the sentencing context, let's say, are available to that individual. And the purpose is to be looking at things other than jail, right? And so that is what the healing plan is intended to do. It's intended to look at options that are culturally appropriate, that will be available to assist this person on their healing journey, because what we know, what the data shows, is that putting people in jail doesn't get the outcomes that we're looking for in that regard. So those are essentially the two primary purposes of it. But the question that we got here talks about results in court. So I'm thinking that what this individual was curious about is about outcomes. And so I thought I might take you through maybe kind of a scenario. And the scenario we were imagining was of an individual who was charged with theft and break and enter. That particular individual might be in active addiction, might have a history of trauma personally and within their immediate family. And so in terms of the options that might be identified in a Gladue report for that particular individual, one of them might be for this person to attend a culturally appropriate treatment center. Some of you may know of Round Lake. Round Lake is a good example of that. So that would be looking at how might the court help the individual to address some of the underlying issues and trauma that may have contributed to them being before the court in the first place. And in this particular individual's case, that would be active addiction and trauma. So the person might also be required to report to probation. That happens often. And when thinking about how this particular approach, this is just one option. It's not a variety of options here, and healing plans usually include a couple of things for the courts to consider. But when thinking about that versus just having somebody be sentenced to jail, it's clear that having someone attend a culturally appropriate treatment center better takes into account the individual's personal circumstances and needs, which is hopefully going to help address the root causes that contributed to them getting into the situation that they find themselves in. Sentencing someone to jail does not give somebody the same opportunity to address underlying issues. So I think that that's just something that needs to be kind of at the forefront. And what the purpose of this whole process is trying to achieve is also ensuring that people don't find themselves in the same place in the future. So if an approach doesn't take into account underlying issues or dealing with underlying trauma and that person continues, I think as Lisa talked about, to push those things down and to not address them, it's more likely that they will find themselves in similar situations in the future. So better to find an approach that addresses these underlying issues. Okay, thank you, Jolene.
Great, thanks, Rhea. Sarah's going to answer the next question for us. So the question is, what can we do as community partners to assist in or facilitate the making of a Gladue report? Can you answer that for us, Sarah, please?
Right. So I have this question. It came from one of our community partners, I think. And hi to all of you who are here. I haven't had the chance to scroll through the participants list or the video panel to see all your names and faces, but I'm really happy you're here. So the answer to this question is to go to the BC First Nation Justice Council website, bcfnjc.com, and click the information for the public. You can let the individual read what is on the screen or print it off for them to take with them. But then click the Request Gladue Report button, which would then prompt for a bunch of information to be provided: their name, their contact information, phone or email, their lawyer name and contact information, their location, and some other information. And then click Submit, which then will have the BC First Nation Justice Council contact them. You can also highlight the variety of Legal Aid BC Gladue publications, which we have available for in print copy or electronic copies. And actually, since receiving this question, we decided to put together this little, I guess, virtual display of our publication, which I've just thrown the link into the chat, which you can view later, maybe bookmark as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah.
It's Coralie. I just had a quick question, Sarah. When we're referring that, does a person have to have a lawyer? What if the client's not eligible for a lawyer and is proceeding on their own? Are they still eligible for a Gladue report in the new system?
Sarah, I can jump in and answer this question.
Thanks, Rhea.
Yeah, no worries, Coralie. My understanding is that yes, the answer is yes to that. It's not like the previous process when it was housed within legal aid that, we were looking at legal aid eligibility for coordination of Gladue reports. Through the system and through the program that the BC First Nation Justice Council oversees, it's open to any Indigenous person. So they can go ahead and use the process that Sarah has identified to request the report. And yeah, it's not dependent on anything else other than the identification, I think, of them being Indigenous and the need for the Gladue report. And of course, like at any space, I think resources, but I don't think they're in a place right now where that's been prohibitive. But Caroline, I'm just going to ask you quickly, does that, because you are involved in the new process and have had the opportunity to engage with it, is that an accurate summary? Is there anything you might add to that?
No, that was a question that I did ask the director at one point not long ago, and he said that basically any Indigenous person can have a Gladue report in the organization. So I didn't ask the question about the lawyer, but
great, thank you, Caroline.
Hi, this is Sarah Kahn, and I'm the coordinator of intake and referral services. So I have sent a link out to Alex, who oversees the community partners, and a few of the people on this session. I just want to let you know that we are going to be having a session on February 16th, where Mitch Walker, who is the director of Gladue Services with BC First Nations Justice Council. And so I will encourage them to invite you, for those who may be interested, on the process of what happens when applying for a Gladue report and so on.
Great.
Sarah, would you like me to put that link into the chat? the registration link?
Sure. Do you want me? You have it? Don't you, Sarah?
I have it.
Perfect. Thanks.
And just before we move on to the next question, in relation to the resources and the really great link that Sarah put together, summarizing and putting everything in one place for you. I think Elizabeth had a question earlier on about, for people that were interested in getting more of a historical understanding about RV Gladue, where might they, and how Gladue reporting began, where might they go? And I think there was a response around the Gladue Primer piece. So the Gladue Primer is a little bit of an outdated resource, but I agree, it still contains a lot of helpful information. What I would recommend is checking out the Guide for the Legal Review of Gladue Reports, or the best practices for writing Gladue reports. In there, there's a nice kind of summary of legal aid report program. Well, that would be more best practices for writing, the history of that particular program, and then an overview of the case law of RV Gladue, et cetera. So I would encourage you to check that out. And hopefully, Elizabeth, that answered your question in that respect, and we can move on to this one.
Great, thanks everybody. So the next question, Sarah, if you can take care of this one as well, is can a legal aid client with a CERC, so a criminal early resolution contract, be assisted with a Gladue report and a legal aid lawyer? Can you help us with that, Sarah, please?
Yeah, I think, the short answer is yes. Regardless of their status with legal aid, all Indigenous people in BC are eligible to receive Gladue reports through the BC First Nation Justice Council. So they can have a CERC, like a criminal early resolution contract, a regular contract, or no contract at all with legal aid. Legal aid lawyers are also expected to connect with Indigenous clients to get instructions on how those clients would like Gladue principles to be applied in their matter. And it can be applied at all stages of a criminal process, including the charge assessment stage. So the short answer is yes.
Fabulous, thank you. So the next question is, who will have access to the Gladue report or Gladue submission? Will it be read aloud in court? So I'll take care of this. So once a Gladue report is filed with a court, it becomes a court document. So defense counsel, Crown counsel, and the judge will all have access to it. And if it's in an Indigenous or First Nations court, the elders will also read it. And different organizations have different processes attached to how these reports can be accessed. So currently the Justice Council has provincial responsibility for Gladue reports in it. So they have their own approach specifically with regard to how the reports can be accessed. So if you want to know about their processes, you can contact them directly through their website. But in terms of practice, so at times portions of the report may be read out loud in court. And this can cause some sensitivities, of course. So if a person is concerned about a section of the report being read in court, they can tell their Gladue report writer or lawyer that, and then they can make a request that those sensitive areas not be read in court, and maybe just identify them with the page number and the paragraphs number so that everyone is aware what is preferred not to be shared. Now, if a portion of the report is read in court, anyone would hear it. So that would mean media or anyone who may be in the courtroom at the time. Gladue submissions are usually provided verbally or orally, but sometimes they can be written down. So if they are written down, the same situation would apply. If there's a sensitive portion of it, you can identify that to your lawyer or the Gladue report writer so that those sensitive areas are not shared. You can request that. Now, if the person is sentenced to federal time, that Gladue report will follow them into CSC. So this is a court process that takes place, but the same process doesn't apply currently with provincial sentences. So that's something to keep in mind. The next question we have has sort of been touched on, but we'll cover it more thoroughly. And that is how to apply for a Gladue report. So maybe Rhea, can you take us through that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of ways right now to get a Gladue report. in BC. We've talked about the BC First Nations Justice Council way, but even prior to the Justice Council stepping into this space, there was always the ability for somebody to connect with a Gladue report writer privately, so to kind of retain them privately to prepare a Gladue report, and that option still exists today. So we're kind of in the process of trying to connect with some of the educational institutions that provide training for Gladue report writers to get a sense of whether they keep any kind of lists around this, because unlike the legal aid roster where we kind of knew who those individuals were, we don't really have a good sense of who's doing this work privately anymore. So we're going to be looking at trying to facilitate that aspect of it. But for most people, the cost of a Gladue report and to retain somebody privately is quite prohibitive. They can be expensive, so it's not going to be an option for everybody, but it is just something we wanted to touch on as an alternative, let's say, to other places to request reports. The other option that some people may or may not be aware of is some First Nations actually have their own staff that have been hired to write Gladue reports. And so in order to connect with them, it would be likely that they would have to be a member of that nation, and you'd have to connect with the nation itself in order to arrange that. And then some organizations prepare Gladue reports for the clients that they serve, for example, like the UBC Indigenous Legal Clinic. So they kind of do that on a little bit of an ad hoc basis. It's not a formal report program per se, but they definitely do assist clients in preparing Gladue reports from our experience. And then so the last option we've talked about is and it's been the first one we've discussed, which is the BC First Nations Justice Council. So I think in sum, I've captured all the options. Jolene, have I missed anything?
No, I would just say that for all of the different court players on the Justice Council's website, there are different, for example, if you're Crown Counsel, defense counsel, or judge, there's different direction for them to who to contact in order to request the report. So it's a little bit different than perhaps previously was previously available.
Okay, Jolene, I think we have maybe one question remaining that we received in advance, and I'm just noting the time, which is 4:06. So thank you to everyone that's continued to hang in there for this, but we will answer this last question, and then maybe if there's any interest, we can open it up if anyone else has any other questions, or perhaps I'll just invite you to pop any questions that you might have in the chat so we get a sense of whether it's time to wrap up the session or not. Okay, go ahead, Jolene.
Perfect, thank you. So the last question we received is, who are persons of interest to be interviewed for Gladue reports? This is a great question. So anyone who has a close contact with or close connection with the person getting the Gladue report would be interviewed. So we refer to those people as collaterals. So they might be a partner, parents, siblings, counselors, elders. Keep in mind that people can be disconnected though. So it's really up to the individual, right? So perhaps a person's mother wasn't part of their life for their entire life. Maybe they were there until they were about 9 years old and then they were absent. So there isn't really a close connection perhaps now, but there is value in interviewing that mom, of course. So it would be important to still capture her in the interviews. And each collateral can have a different perspective and knowledge on the report subject's life. So their input can help to corroborate what others have said through interviews, but that's not always the case. So interviewing a variety of people helps to present a fuller picture of the individual before the courts. So that's the end of the questions we received thus far. Maybe we can take a look, Rhea, now at the questions in the chat.
I did see one earlier from Francis, and Caroline, I'm hoping I can direct it to you because I think that you would be well positioned to answer it, if that's all right.
Sure.
It says, if clients are in custody, how are you able to create safe space with COVID? Or pardon me, if clients are in custody, how are you able to create the safe space question? If with COVID, are most of the conversations done via phone call?
In corrections?
I think, yes. Yeah, I think in correctional institutions, and Francis, I'll let you clarify if I've misunderstood, but I think that for people who are in custody, then how do you create safe space when you're connecting with them?
To write a Gladue report.
Perhaps if that's the context you want to answer it in, Caroline, and from your perspective, that might be helpful.
Okay, well, I think there's two trains of thought there. Like if someone is writing a Gladue report for an inmate that's incarcerated, the safe space would be in an interview room done virtually. So they're put into a room just as they would be doing a visit with their families. And the writer would be on the, probably on video, Zoom. I think that they use Teams at corrections. And so actually we just had a writer report for someone who's incarcerated at Madsqui. And it was all done through the video idea.
Are there any tips or tools that someone might use? Because, we in this age where we're depending on technology more and more, it's challenging to have that connection with other people because we're not in their presence. So any advice on how we make that space safe in that respect, maybe trauma informed or maybe perhaps more culturally relevant to somebody?
Mm-hmm. For when they're incarcerated? Well, we have 35 elders that are contracted in federal corrections to, provide spiritual services and culture, but they we're not pan-Indian, so we have different elders have different teachings, but we're all spiritual. We teach spirituality. So I think that we all have our own sacred spaces within each institution that's provided for us to do the work. But now that COVID is on, of course, a lot of the ceremonies cannot be held, right? But we do have opportunities for smaller groups. Does that answer the question?
I think that answer has been helpful for me. I'm going to just ask Francis if there's anything that would be useful to follow up on, just pop that in the chat.
Hi, Priya. I'm sorry about that. It was actually me somehow. Catherine and Sylvia and Francis, we're all in the same. So it's Sylvia who actually asked the question.
Thank you.
My apology. I feel like an imposter.
No. Well, thank you for clarifying that, Sylvia. And hello to all of you that are in the same room. And thank you for your participation. But I'll ask then, does that help answer the question that you had?
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Awesome. And then there was just one last question in the chat from Raquel, and it says, pertaining to the prerequisite of being certified as a Gladue writer, how is the level of knowledge of Indigenous history and culture measured? That's the first part. Writing on such culturally sensitive information and history of an individual. Would a First Nations or Indigenous Studies course suffice as a qualification for a writer who is non-Indigenous? Is taking a course like that a prerequisite? I just question how a non-Indigenous person can not only share the story of an Indigenous person, but also write a culturally based healing plan without any of the shared historical experiences themselves. So I think there's a lot of good questions in there. And Raquel, the first thing I'll say around prerequisites of being a Gladue report writer, I think that you'd have to look to the organization that is doing the work to determine what that is. When LABC was overseeing the LABC Gladue Report program, we did have prerequisites that we were looking for in Gladue report writers, but we were careful not to be super strict with formalized educational pieces because we knew that might be an impediment for certain individuals to participate in writing Gladue reports. So what I mean by that is having a formalized degree, other things like that. But in relation to the way that we approached working with Indigenous and non-Indigenous writers, this is a relatively small group of individuals. And we were trying to, at the time, I think, service a request demand of about 300 report reports per year. Most Gladue report writers have full-time day jobs, like Caroline. she's working full-time, and then she's doing Gladue reports on the side. So what that means is that there's a limited resource, and there's a limited amount of time people have to contribute to this work. So I think that from our perspective, it was always a priority to connect people with Indigenous writers wherever possible. But where that was not possible, we worked with non-Indigenous writers who were closely connected to Indigenous communities, had experience working with Indigenous peoples, and had the requisite education and knowledge around the communities that they were situated in, to make sure that when they were developing healing plans, that they were putting forward recommendations that made sense. But mind you, they don't do that in isolation of the community. We were always ensuring to remind people to connect with community and say, does this make sense? Like, is this resource even available? Because sometimes what was happening with Gladue reports is recommendations were being included and people wouldn't be able to even access those resources for months at a time, right? Like, there's such a long waiting list. So there were a bunch of different checks and balances that were in place to make sure that the recommendations were relevant, that they were available and accessible. So hopefully that's helpful, but that's just from the perspective of when we were kind of looking after that program. There are likely to be different requirements for different programs. So I would really encourage you to, well, and actually, you know what, this will be a great question for Mitch Walker at that session. I think he'd be able to answer that. So I would encourage you to bring that forward at that time and see what the Justice Council is doing with that. But hopefully that's helpful. And Caroline or Lisa, I don't know if you have anything to add with respect to that answer. You guys, you might have something in addition to what I've shared.
No, I really agree with you. I think that for like non-Indigenous writers, they need to have some awareness of what the communities are all about, or what Indigenous people are all about, and to take some, if you don't have any knowledge, then to take some training. And I think that to have a diverse pool of writers is important, but it's also important to the client, that the client is the most important person in this whole process. So I think that keeping that in mind, then the writer needs to decide if they qualify themselves or if they could do a proper job. So I guess that's all I would say about that. But good question for Mitch.
Great. And oh, sorry, Jolene, did you have something to add?
We have one other question in the chat that's come up as well, and I think it's probably also a Mitch question. So Lisa is asking, how long is the wait for a new client once it's requested? Usually it is requested in court in my area. How long before the client will get a call? So
yeah, I think that's a good question for Mitch, but I think that the timeline for the production of the report, well, at LABC, it was 8 weeks. That was what we always shot for, but there's lots of things that interrupt that timeline. I think that the Justice Council reduced that by 2 weeks. So it's supposed to be 6 weeks from start to finish. But again, I think that's a question for Mitch, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer that.
I just see on their website, it says, once they have submitted a request for Gladue reports, the Gladue Services Coordinator will respond to the email or phone number that they provided within 72 hours.
Okay, that's good. That's helpful. Awesome. Thank you, Raquel. All right. And just being mindful of the time, we are 17 minutes over. So I thank you to everyone for sticking around and asking really good questions and being so thoughtful. And thank you so much to Lisa and to Caroline again. It's been incredible to spend this time with you. And I look forward, I'm available here. If anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me, rhea.bailey at legalaidbc.com. You can email me or, I am instant message me if you're at LABC. And I think that's probably about it, Jolene, unless I'll
pop your email in the chat just because you gave the wrong email address.
Okay. See, that's what happens when you are been off on mat leave and come back and have only been back for 6 months. Still haven't got your email address right. There we go. So thank you, Jolene.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to have you all here. And thank you again, Lisa and Caroline.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone, for participating, listening in. Hope that you learned something. Thank you again, Lisa. I appreciate your contribution.
And to you.
Thank you.